Fenders. In the last episode we covered the hood, the trunk, the doors, and some nitnoids of covering and everything else. In this episode we're doing fenders. Both left and right front and left and right rear. They don't look too bad, do they? I mean, they don't, a little bit cracks and some rust here or there, but overall I didn't think I had a huge amount of problems. I knew I had some rust to repair. I knew that the back of the fenders were rusty as all get out. I knew I had some things that I discovered that I had to fix, but I didn't think I had a huge amount of issue and nothing I couldn't overcome in a day or two or three of good, hard work. I also know I had some potential older repairs to repair and a lot of rust to overcome, and using the same stripper I took care of all the paint and all the coverings and everything else on the fenders. What wouldn't come off, I then used my flapper disc and I took off mechanically. You're looking at the interim stage, and I discovered that I had some issues here. At some point in the past, the car had been either hit or got into an accident and had undergone some previous repairs. Using a method I'm not personally very familiar with, parts and bits were brazed onto the fender to overcome some issues there. You're looking at the back of the fender there, and you can tell that the original fender was more or less left there with the patch panel put over it. I really got to work on the back with a flapper disc and my ankle grinder, getting rid of all the rust that I could. I then more or less dissolved what was left with the etching fluid, so that I didn't have another cancer coming back in a year, 2 or 3. At that point, I immediately epoxy primed and let everything cure for a day or two before I got into some of these structural repairs. Which really is to say that I epoxy primed the back of the fenders, but not the fronts. I had a lot of work to do that I needed to really see where I was going to be cutting and grinding and replacing. Quite a bit of that. This piece I actually left. I didn't replace this. I didn't find a patch panel, and I didn't replace the fender. I learned that MGAs are distinct with their fender repairs with their fenders, and not all of them are the same. So if I buy a used fender, it's a crapshoot as to whether I'm getting a good one that fit, one that hadn't been repaired before. And I wanted to use what was already left on my car, so I ended up filling this with tiger hair and getting it smooth and turning it into a working, decent fender. It looked pretty good after the fact. And here's the other front fender, not too awfully bad in the front. I ended up keeping that as it is, repairing as best I could, filling in all kinds of cracks and holes with both the rustification stuff and epoxy tiger hair so that I didn't have cracks or voids, and I kept on going. I ground out all of the rust behind the fender, and there it is without the rust and so forth. I then used the derustification, the rust dissolver, the etching fluid, and some of this stuff here to get rid of as much rust as I possibly could. That dull gray is what's left over after you use this stuff, and I took a lot of time to get rid of as much rust as I could. See a patch at one point somebody had done, another patch in the front that I kind of took down and began to repair, and I epoxy primed the back of that fender as well. And there you have it. So this was a repair to some rust in the past. A patch panel was put over rust that hadn't been cut out. It was brazed on, pop riveted in other areas, and then more or less smoothed out with Bondo. Now, not for a second am I crapping on someone's work. I've done some sketchy stuff, especially when I was 16 and with my first MGB. This is a repair method that I certainly never learned, so it's not a bad method. It just afforded me an opportunity to learn some more skills and to do some more welding. Using a patch panel that I bought from Moss Motors, I overlaid that on the fender. I drew out where I wanted to slice and dice, and there you are. There you are looking at the patch about to get removed and the patch removed, the old patch removed. With some other work I had to get done, but I filled all that stuff with tiger hair and some other stuff. There it is. There's the bottom of that fender cut off. There I am replacing. I'm cutting to shape the patch panel, cut down, and tacked on to the bottom of the fender with the fender on the actual car itself for a good fit. And my welds ground down. Yeah, and on the back too. I didn't do a bad job actually. I left that as it is, and you can see that again somebody had done some repair that, not the way I would have done it, and certainly not a way that I recognize, but an effective means of holding metal together. I just would have taken off the old patch, the old rust, and patched over that with something better. Structurally, and in terms of rust, the other fender wasn't in bad shape. It had a couple of creases and some things that I ended up banging out with my rubber mallet, um, but it really wasn't too bad. I took a lot of time to flatten out that panel and make it look nice, and any low spots and things I couldn't figure out, I ended up filling in with tiger hair and a little bit of Bondo. Once all that was done, and once the fender was completely stripped, I filled in the hole where the old antenna was, using a piece of metal that I'd fashioned. That was actually kind of fun. And then I epoxy primed everything yet again, and let it cure for quite some time. You can see the other rear fenders in the background there. I let these sit for a good couple days to get a good hard coat of epoxy primer before I started to do some body work to it. So if you've watched any of my other prior videos, you'd know that I like to do the epoxy primer over bare metal immediately after I strip something, and then the Bondo on top of that. And the reason is because Bondo tends to hold in water. If you have any kind of a damage or a crack to your paint or a parking lot ding, and the Bondo gets dinged, it'll wick in water and sit on top of that bare metal and cause a big rust spot. If you epoxy prime first and Bondo over that, you're much more likely not to have issues in rust that you have to repair later. I know I had some issues with the rear fenders, especially after I was trying to take them off the car with grinders and torches and so forth, but I didn't think they were going to be too awfully bad until I started to really strip things down and get a good look at what I was looking at and what I had to work with. More rust, especially on the back, as you can see there. So I derustified using my flapper disc and my angle grinder again, and I got down to as much bare metal as I thought I needed to, so I could put in these patch panels on both sides, left and right. Again, at some point, somebody had brazed on some repairs over rusty metal, so I had to a lot of work there. I chemically stripped all the paint. I got rid of as much Bondo and old paint and new paint and everything else as you can see here, and got myself a good clean surface to start doing some work with. So here's something interesting. On both the left and right rear fenders at the top, at the most forward leading edge of the fender was this divot. Somebody at some point had dropped something heavy across both fenders and it caused that divot, that dent. It took me quite a while to repair using a hammer and a dolly and a lot of patience. I ended up getting it back to the shape I needed it to be in, but I did a little bit of Bondo to smooth out the rumples and the dimples and everything else. With some basic repairs out of the way, I epoxy primed both the front and back of both fenders, mainly so I didn't have to deal with flash rust or any other issues like that, and again my preference for epoxy primer first and bodywork thereafter. And once cured, I put them back onto the car to kind of measure out where I wanted to put my patch panels and so forth. You can see that I've more or less dry fitted them, and using some blue tape there, kind of wargamed where my next patch panel would go. There's a patch panel overlaying the fender, and I did a pretty good job, I think, of coming up with the right curve at the right point and all that other stuff. And using my angle grinder, I cut off the bits and pieces. As you can see, there were multiple layers of repairs over repairs over repairs, and a lot of work for me to overcome. I cut out all the bad stuff, as you can see here. I shaped my patch panel as I needed to. I test fit it, had to bend it a little bit in some spots and make it work out. I had to trim it again to make it work out correctly. I put it back up on the car, found out that I'd cut off not enough, so I cut off more, and I tack welded it to the fender. Anything that was left I then ground down, made it look pretty, and test fitted it up against the car yet again. So by this point I knew that I had the correct shape and curve for the fender, and I needed to fill in the welding holes and the other prep work. I did that with tiger hair, and I smoothed them flat. I also had some issues on the front of the fender that I ground down, some braze welds. Ground those down. I filled again with tiger hair. There's where you see it there, and I smoothed it all out and made the correct shape. The other rear fender had similar issues with repairs over rust and repairs over repairs. There were 3 layers here. I did the same thing. I cut off all that junk. I welded in the new piece, and I called it a day. There it is with the piece off. I was able to get all that rust out, and I encapsulated it with other stuff. Again, there's my welded in repair, not too bad, and smoothed out with some tiger hair, and there we go. Not that they needed it, but the rear fenders didn't have a whole lot of Bondo repair to begin with. I mean, they were in pretty good shape. I did some over the black epoxy primer. I'll be darned if I can find the pictures. And oh well, I block sanded everything, made it all look smooth and have a nice shape to it. And after that, like I did with the fronts and the doors and everything else, I primer sealed everything, both fenders, back and front. There it is, the front one's on a nice warm day and a nice sunny day. The primer seal that I use is a high build stuff, and by God does it work nicely, and it cures quickly. I set up a couple different stations, one with my ladder and a couple of sawhorses I've got, and I didn't do too bad of a job. My main goal on all of this was to really just get a smooth face and something really nice for the eventual paint. When I started to wet sand this, however, I found some areas, especially on the front, where I needed to do some rework. When I started block sanding the front fenders, I found some spots that needed to get fixed, and I did that. That's what you're looking at there. Once I smoothed everything out, I then I reapplied that high build primer stuff and came up with a pretty nice product. Still some work there, and still some more work there. And there's the repaint, the redo. Had a couple of other spots that came still popping out as highs or lows, and I eventually overcame, and there's the final product for the front fenders. That's what I eventually painted once I got to that point here. And there's everything lined up against the car that I also painted. There's the car in black epoxy, getting ready for the next set of that high build primer sealer. There it is in the back, and freshly painted. There's the front, also freshly painted. Not painted, but freshly primed. Again, this is a high build primer that I use, and the engine bay looking as nice as I possibly could get it, and not too bad of a job, I didn't think. There she blows. So once I was done with this, I took a break and kind of took a status on what I was doing and what had to get done next. Did I want to paint, or did I want to do other stuff? I really wanted to paint.